The supreme overlord of the Varketh Dominion, Zalvok the Unyielding, stood at the command bridge of his battlecruiser, the Vengeance Eternal, gazing at the projected holographic map of the galaxy. His reptilian eyes narrowed as his clawed fingers tapped against the glowing surface. The map pulsed with thousands of colored dots, each representing a conquered system, a colony, or a vassal state under the Dominion's rule. For centuries, the Varketh had expanded their reach, crushing resistance, enslaving worlds, and integrating lesser species into their war machine. There was no force in the known universe that could challenge them. Or so it seemed. One system remained unmarked. Zalvok's gaze lingered on the tiny blue world orbiting a yellow star in an unremarkable region of the galaxy. It was a system that had remained untouched despite its ripe conditions for conquest. No defense grid strong enough to repel a Dominion fleet, no advanced technology that could rival the might of their warships, just a single planet inhabited by a species still bound to its homeworld. Primitive. Isolated. Yet, untouchable. Earth, Zalvok muttered. The name tasted foreign on his tongue. He was not the first to consider Earth as a target. His predecessors had drawn up invasion plans, calculated the risks, and strategized campaigns, only for every attempt to be abandoned at the last moment. No official reason was ever given. No orders to attack were ever issued. No records of failed missions remained in the Dominion archives. It was as if the very thought of invading Earth had been erased from history. That fact alone disturbed him more than anything. His second-in-command, General Threxos, stepped forward, his dark carapace gleaming under the pale lights of the bridge. "My lord, we have received intelligence that suggests Earth would fall within a single planetary cycle. The humans lack interstellar travel. Their forces are weak compared to our own. Their weapons are primitive. They rely on kinetic projectiles and chemical propellants. Their energy-based defenses are laughable. We would meet no significant resistance." Zalvok continued to stare at the map. "Then why has no empire before us taken this world? The Kryn, the Zenari, even the Shade Syndicate, all of them set their eyes on Earth. Yet none of them conquered it. None of them even tried. Do you not find that suspicious?" Threxos hesitated. "Perhaps they deemed it unworthy. The resources are not particularly abundant. Their technology is insignificant. Their strategic position in the galaxy is mediocre at best." Zalvok turned his gaze on him, his eyes burning with quiet intensity. "That is a lie, and you know it." Silence fell over the bridge. The officers stationed at their posts pretended to be engrossed in their work, but Zalvok knew they were listening. This was not the first time the question had been raised, but it was the first time he demanded answers. A low, guttural growl rumbled in his throat as he straightened his posture. "I have read the old reports, the ones buried deep within the classified archives. They all tell the same story: fleets sent toward Earth simply vanish. No distress signals. No wreckage. No survivors. The records do not even confirm an attack ever took place. It is as if those ships were erased from existence. Do you still believe it is mere coincidence?" Threxos clenched his mandibles, his posture stiffening. Perhaps the reports were falsified. Or the expeditions failed due to unknown natural causes. "Do you believe that, or are you telling me what you think I want to hear?" Zalvok's voice was like ice, and for the first time, Threxos hesitated. The Overlord exhaled slowly, turning away from his general. He had spent the last cycle reviewing everything about Earth, what little information was available. Some accounts spoke of an unknown cosmic anomaly surrounding the planet. Others hinted at something much worse. But the most disturbing reports came from intercepted transmissions of the Zenari Empire before their complete collapse. The messages were fragmented, barely coherent, but one sentence stood out. "We see now. We understand. We were never the hunters. We were the bait." Zalvok's fingers twitched. He had conquered countless worlds, annihilated entire species, and brought civilizations to their knees. He had seen horrors unfold on the battlefield that would have driven lesser beings to madness. Yet, that single line haunted him. "General," he said at last, his voice low. "I want answers." Threxos straightened. "What do you command, my lord?" "Send a probe to the system. No direct fleet deployment yet. I want to observe. I want to see if Earth is truly as ordinary as it appears." The general bowed his head. "As you wish." As Threxos departed to carry out the orders, Zalvok remained standing at the command bridge, his mind restless. He had made a career of exposing weaknesses, exploiting fear, and enforcing his will upon those who opposed him. But Earth was different. It was not fear of its military might that kept the galactic empires at bay. It was something else. Something unseen. Something waiting. And he intended to find out what. The probe had been launched. Zalvok stood motionless, watching as the projection on the command bridge displayed its slow descent toward the blue world. Every system was calibrated for maximum stealth, ensuring that no human technology would detect it. It was a standard reconnaissance procedure, one that the Dominion had used countless times before. But this mission felt different. There was an unease in the air, a weight pressing down on the room. Threxos returned to his side, his mandibles clicking together as he studied the readings. "The probe is functioning as expected. Atmospheric entry was successful. We have full telemetry. No signs of interference." Zalvok exhaled, his gaze fixed on the live feed. The planet rotated beneath them, oblivious to the silent intruder slipping through its skies. It was a world brimming with life, its surface covered in vast oceans and sprawling landmasses. Cities glittered in the darkness, clusters of artificial light dotting the continents. It looked peaceful. Ordinary. A world that should have been conquered ages ago. "Begin scanning for anomalies," he commanded. Threxos gestured to the technicians, who adjusted the probe's parameters. The data began to pour in: climate conditions, atmospheric composition, electromagnetic activity. Everything appeared normal. But Zalvok was not convinced. He had learned long ago that true danger did not always reveal itself immediately. Then something changed. The readings flickered. The screens dimmed for a fraction of a second before stabilizing. A faint static hummed through the speakers, barely perceptible. Zalvok narrowed his eyes. "What was that?" One of the officers hesitated before answering. "Unclear, my lord. It could be interference from the planet's ionosphere." Zalvok's expression darkened. "Could be. Or it could be something else." The probe continued its descent, drifting through the upper atmosphere. It adjusted its sensors, shifting its focus to deep space signals, searching for any evidence of past encounters. If the lost expeditions had left any trace, the probe would find it. Minutes passed in silence. The crew waited, the only sound the rhythmic beeping of the probe's telemetry. Then the alarms blared. "Signal disruption detected." An officer reported. "Unknown energy source interfering with data transmission." Zalvok's claws curled into fists. "Source? Impossible to pinpoint," the officer admitted. "It's everywhere. Like it's embedded into the very fabric of the system." A new alert flashed on the screen. The probe's cameras captured something, an object floating in the vastness of space. "Wreckage." Zalvok's pulse quickened. "Enhance the image." The screen sharpened, revealing the remains of a colossal starship, its hull twisted and broken. Time had eroded its markings, but the design was unmistakable. "The Kryn Imperium," Threxos whispered. "That ship disappeared over 300 cycles ago." Zalvok felt the weight of history pressing down on him. The Kryn had been one of the most formidable military forces in the galaxy, their fleets unmatched in sheer firepower. And yet, here was the evidence of their failure, adrift in the silent void, forgotten by time. More wreckage appeared as the probe continued its scan. Dozens of ships. Hundreds. A graveyard of vessels from different empires, spanning centuries. Some were reduced to unrecognizable debris, others eerily intact as if their crews had simply vanished. This. Threxos hesitated, his usual confidence wavering. This is not natural. Zelvok agreed. The Kryn had not simply lost a battle. They had been erased, their ships left as holotombs. But if that was the case, then where were the bodies? The probe adjusted its trajectory, moving toward the largest derelict, a Zenari dreadnought, its engines long dead. It drifted aimlessly, its once glorious hull scarred and pitted. The Zenari had vanished centuries ago, their empire collapsing overnight. The official story claimed internal strife had led to their downfall. But this ship told another tale. The probe latched onto the dreadnought's outer shell, sending a drone to investigate. The feed flickered as it maneuvered through the ruined corridors. The halls were empty. No corpses. No signs of battle. It was as if the crew had simply ceased to exist. A message flickered onto the probe's screen, an old transmission, its signal weak but intact. It was the last log from the Zenari captain. Zelvok leaned forward. Play it. The recording was distorted, the voice barely audible. But the fear in it was unmistakable. Wrong. We were wrong. We thought it was defenseless, thought we were the predators. But we were bait. It sees. The transmission cut off. The silence that followed was suffocating. Zelvok exhaled slowly. Retrieve the probe. Now. Threxos hesitated but obeyed. The technicians worked quickly, sending the recall signal. The probe disengaged from the dreadnought and turned back toward open space. But before it could accelerate, the signal cut out. Zelvok's eyes widened. What happened? One of the officers frantically scanned the readings. It's just gone, my lord. Zelvok's pulse thundered in his ears. The probe had not been destroyed. No explosion, no energy signature, nothing. It had simply ceased to exist. The bridge was silent. No one dared to speak. Then a new signal pulsed through the speakers. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A whisper. Zelvok recognized the voice. It was the same captain from the transmission. But the words were different. We see you now. The sound cut off. The lights flickered. The command bridge was plunged into darkness for a single, agonizing second. When the power returned, Zelvok stood frozen, his claws digging into the railing. Threxos exhaled shakily. Orders, my lord? Zelvok did not answer immediately. His mind raced, calculating, analyzing. There was no logic to what had happened. No explanation that fit within the boundaries of reason. But one thing was certain. Earth was not a world to be conquered. It was something else entirely. Something watching. Something waiting. Erase all records of this mission, he said at last, his voice steady despite the unease in his chest. Inform no one. Not yet. Threxos nodded, though his expression remained grim. And what of Earth? Zelvok turned toward the holographic map. The small blue planet continued to spin in the void, as if nothing had happened. Let it be, he murmured. For now. Zelvok stood in his private chambers, his claws pressed against the cold surface of the command console. The glow of the holographic interface cast sharp shadows across his face, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He had given the order to erase the mission logs, yet the unease refused to leave him. The whispers from the void, the probe's inexplicable disappearance, the abandoned ships floating like tombstones in an empty graveyard, none of it made sense. And now, the voice. We see you now. Those words lingered in his mind, wrapping around his thoughts like unseen tendrils. Something had spoken through the void. Something had watched them. But what? His fingers twitched as he keyed in a private communication channel, bypassing the ship's main relay and sending a direct transmission to an undisclosed location deep within Dominion space. The call was not standard protocol. In fact, it was forbidden. The Dominion did not seek counsel. It did not fear myths or legends. But Zelvok was not a fool. He had conquered hundreds of worlds, but he had also learned when to respect the unknown. The transmission pulsed, then stabilized. A dimly lit chamber appeared on the screen, and from the shadows emerged a figure unlike any Zelvok had ever seen. The being was old, so ancient that its body barely resembled the form it must have once had. Its flesh was gnarled and withered, its elongated skull adorned with strange markings that pulsed with a faint, eerie glow. Its eyes, milky and unseeing, seemed to pierce through the screen as if staring directly at Zelvok's soul. This was an Elder of the Ascended, one of the few beings in the galaxy that had lived through epochs, surviving long after their own civilizations had turned to dust. The Elder tilted his head slightly, as if he had expected the call. "You should not have looked, Overlord," he rasped. His voice was a whisper wrapped in a storm, barely audible yet carrying the weight of 1,000 lost empires. Zelvok kept his expression unreadable. "I need answers." The Elder did not move. "You already know the answer. You have seen the graveyard. You have heard the voice." Zelvok's eyes narrowed. "I have seen wreckage. I have seen the ruins of empires that once rivaled my own. What I have not seen is why." The Elder exhaled slowly. "Because it does not leave witnesses." A cold silence stretched between them. Zelvok's claws tightened against the console. "Then why are you still alive?" A dry, rattling chuckle escaped the Elder's lips. "Because I do not seek what cannot be understood." He leaned forward, his expression darkening. "But you have already seen too much." Zelvok's voice remained steady. "Tell me what you know." The Elder studied him for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he reached out and pressed a hidden mechanism on his side of the transmission. The chamber behind him shifted, revealing an ancient star map, one far older than anything Zelvok had encountered in his conquests. Its markings did not align with any modern galactic charts. Some of the stars depicted had long since died. Others had yet to be born. At the very edge of the map, among the celestial patterns that had remained unchanged for millennia, was a single symbol. It was not a planetary designation, nor a military outpost. It was not even labeled as a world of interest. Instead, it was marked with a single warning: unseen, unnamed, unconquered. The Elder pointed a withered finger toward the location of the blue planet Zelvok had come to know as Earth. "There are things in this galaxy older than the stars," he said. "Things that do not follow the rules of life and death. Things that were never meant to be understood." Zelvok remained unmoved. "Superstition." The Elder smiled, though there was no amusement in his expression. "Then tell me, Conqueror of Worlds, where did the Zenari go?" Zelvok said nothing. The Elder continued. "Where are the Kryn warlords? The Shade Syndicate? The Dominion archives hold no records of their downfall. There were no great wars, no last stands, no treaties. They simply vanished, as if they had never existed." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Tell me, Overlord, do you believe in extinction without cause?" Zelvok's thoughts churned. He had built his empire on logic, on strategy, on calculated precision. There was no place for myths. But the evidence was undeniable. No empire had ever conquered Earth. And those who had tried had disappeared. The Elder's gaze did not waver. "There is no invasion, because there is no enemy. You do not conquer the void. You do not battle the abyss. You only fall into it." Zelvok inhaled slowly. "And yet humans remain." The Elder's expression shifted slightly, as if he had expected the question. "Yes. And that should terrify you more than anything." Zelvok's claws tapped against the console. "Are they the ones responsible?" The Elder's lips barely moved. "No." The single word carried a weight that pressed against Zelvok's chest. He had expected an answer. He had not expected that answer. "Then what is responsible?" The Elder exhaled, his gaze darkening. "The same thing that let you live." The word sent an unfamiliar sensation crawling down Zelvok's spine. He had not survived because he was careful. He had survived because something had allowed him to. The transmission flickered. The elder leaned forward, his expression grim. "Leave Earth alone. Forget this ever happened. If you do not." His milky eyes seemed to glow. "You will not have the luxury of disappearing. You will know what happened. You will see it. And you will beg for the fate the others received." The signal cut. Zelvok stood in silence, his breath steady despite the storm raging in his mind. He had come seeking answers, but what he had found was something far worse. Not knowing was a curse. But knowing, truly knowing, was far worse. His claws clenched. The Dominion was the most powerful empire in the galaxy. He had never walked away from a conquest. He had never turned his back on a challenge. And yet, as he stared at the empty screen, a single thought consumed him. Would he be the first to survive knowing the truth? Zelvok had never hesitated in war. He had commanded planetary sieges, crushed rebellions, and executed rival warlords without a second thought. But now, as he stood in the darkness of his personal chamber aboard the Vengeance Eternal, something unfamiliar coiled in his chest, something he refused to name. The Elder's warning echoed in his mind. You do not conquer the void. You do not battle the abyss. You only fall into it. And yet, he could not look away. He had spent the last 3 cycles poring over the data retrieved before the probe's disappearance. Every fragment of telemetry, every distorted transmission. The wreckage in the system was just the beginning. There were other anomalies, fluctuations in gravitational fields, impossible energy readings, something that defied every known law of physics. Something that watched. Zelvok's instinct screamed at him to leave Earth alone. But instinct alone had never ruled his empire. He needed certainty. He needed to see with his own eyes. The decision was made. The next day, his fleet would move. The Vengeance Eternal descended into the black void beyond Earth's moon, its hull absorbing all light, making it a phantom against the stars. It was accompanied by a single escort, a smaller vessel, the Harrowfang, chosen for its speed and maneuverability. Zelvok had ordered minimal personnel. No warships, no armadas. This was not an invasion. This was reconnaissance. Threxos had opposed the decision, but Zelvok had ignored him. He did not need warnings. He needed truth. The moment they crossed into orbit, the unease thickened. The Harrowfang transmitted a scan of the planet's surface. Everything was as expected: vast cities, oceans teeming with life, sprawling forests untouched by war. There were no planetary defenses, no hidden energy grids. The humans lived in ignorance, oblivious to the secrets buried beneath their feet. Then the readings flickered. A transmission crackled through the bridge, but it was not coming from Earth. It was inside the ship. "See you now." Zelvok's claws dug into the armrest of his command throne. The voice was the same. The same distorted whisper that had echoed through the transmission logs of the lost Zenari fleet. The same voice that had spoken through the wreckage of the Kryn. "Source of the signal," he ordered, his voice steady. The officer at the console hesitated. "Unknown, my lord. It's coming from multiple points at once. It's everywhere." The ship trembled. Not from an attack. Not from an external force. From something else. "Shields up." Zelvok barked. The Harrowfang flickered on the screen. A moment later, its signal vanished. "Gone," the officer whispered. "No explosion, no impact. It's just gone." Zelvok felt the weight of the Elder's words pressing against his mind. This was not a battle. This was something else. "Pull us back," he ordered. "Get us out of orbit, now." The helmsman obeyed, the Vengeance Eternal shifting away from Earth's gravity well. But something held it in place. Not a tractor beam. Not an enemy fleet. Something unseen. Zelvok rose from his throne. Status report. The officer's hands trembled over the controls. My lord, we aren't moving. The stars outside the viewport were wrong. Twisting, bending, stretching into impossible shapes. The black void beyond seemed deeper, as if something within it had woken up. And then the screams started. Not from his crew. From the ship itself. A deep, guttural sound reverberated through the hull. Metal groaned, as if something enormous pressed against it. The temperature dropped. The shadows on the bridge stretched unnaturally, slithering across the walls like living things. Then the lights cut out. For the first time in his life, Zalvok felt true silence. It was not the silence of deep space, nor the absence of sound in a vacuum. It was the silence of something that should never be heard. And then it spoke. Not in words. Not in sound. But in his mind. You were warned. Zalvok's vision swam. The bridge, the crew, the ship, everything blurred. He felt weightless, his body slipping away. He was not dying. He was leaving. No. Not leaving. Being taken. Memories that were not his own flashed before him. The Kryn Imperium, screaming as their ships unraveled into nothing. The Zenari captain's final moments as his mind fractured into oblivion. Empires that had once been mighty, now reduced to whispers in the dark. And then Earth. Not the Earth that his scans had shown. Something beneath it. Something vast. Something infinite. It had never been a planet. It had never been a home to humans. The humans were just the bait. Zalvok's mind snapped back into his body. The lights flared to life. The bridge crew gasped, as if they had all been drowning and only now reached the surface. The ship lurched forward, freed from whatever unseen force had held it in place. Get us out of here! Zalvok roared. The Vengeance Eternal burned through space, its engines straining as it tore away from Earth's gravitational pull. The moment they crossed the system's edge, the readings normalized. The shadows retracted. The whispers stopped. Zalvok collapsed into his throne, his breathing heavy. Threxo's voice crackled through the combs. My lord, are we safe? Zalvok did not answer. He looked at the screen one last time. Earth remained unchanged, its people unaware of what had happened above their skies. They went about their lives, oblivious. Oblivious to the thing beneath them. Oblivious to what had let them live. Zalvok exhaled. Set course for Dominion space. Erase all records of this mission. This planet does not exist. Threxos hesitated. And if another empire tries to invade? Zalvok's gaze hardened. They won't. The Vengeance Eternal traveled through the vast emptiness of space at maximum speed, its engines burning hot as if trying to outrun something unseen. The crew was silent, their expressions hollow, their bodies rigid with the kind of tension that could not be eased by distance alone. Zalvok sat in his command throne, motionless, his claws digging into the armrests. The ship's systems had returned to normal. The gravitational distortions had vanished. The whispers had stopped. The moment they had escaped Earth's pull, everything had reset. As if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Zalvok could still feel it in his bones, in his mind. Something inside him had changed, though he did not know what. He had encountered death countless times, had looked into the void of space and seen entire civilizations crumble beneath his command. But this was different. This was not fear of battle, of loss, of destruction. This was something far worse. The bridge remained eerily quiet. No one spoke of what had occurred. No one asked what had held them in place, what had invaded their minds. They all knew the answer, though none dared to say it. Something was beneath Earth. Something that had no name. Something that had existed long before humanity, long before the first empire, long before the stars themselves. And it had let them go. Threxos stepped forward, his normally firm posture shaken. My lord, what do we do now? Zalvok did not answer immediately. He stared at the holographic map of the galaxy, at the tiny, unmarked star system where Earth quietly rotated around its sun. It looked so insignificant. So small. But it wasn't. It was the most dangerous place in existence. His claws flexed. He had built his empire on conquest, on control, on dominance. But Earth was something he could never control. He exhaled slowly. Erase all records of this mission. Effective immediately. The crew obeyed without question. The data logs were wiped, the coordinates deleted, every trace of their journey erased. But it would never be erased from their minds. They would remember. They would always remember. Threxos hesitated. And if the Dominion demands an explanation? Zalvok's voice was cold, firm. We were never there. Threxos nodded, though the unease in his eyes did not fade. Understood, my lord. Zalvok turned back to the map. The weight in his chest did not lessen. He knew the truth now. He understood why no empire had ever conquered Earth. It was not because Earth was strong. It was not because humanity was special. It was because Earth was never meant to be conquered at all. The humans were not the rulers of their world. They were not the ones protecting it. They were allowed to exist. Something beneath them, something older than comprehension, something patient, had chosen to let them stay. And it had chosen to let him live. His claws clenched, but he did not speak. Some truths did not need to be spoken aloud. The ship continued forward, moving farther from Earth, from the thing that slumbered beneath it. But even as the distance grew, Zalvok knew he would never truly be free of it. He would never return. No one ever would. Because some things in the galaxy were not meant to be touched. And some worlds did not belong to anyone at all.